Hello again, everyone, and thank you for joining this combined episode of Skeptics and Seekers and Still Unbelievable. Today, I will be your host and moderator. I'm Andrew Knight, and thank you for joining us. Before we get on with this show, there's some important business to take care of. This is usually the time in the show where we have some kind of programming notes. I'll give you a couple. Matthew Taylor right now is over on the Free Thought Network doing an interview. So if you like to hear Matthew, look out over on Still Unbelievable for that interview. But rather than continuing with programming notes, I think we have something that might better be referred to as a deprogramming note. And to tell you more about that, I'm going to hand the mic to David Johnson.
Hello, and welcome to the last episode of Skeptics and Seekers. How you doing? Skeptics and Seekers, effective immediately is no more. That doesn't mean that you cannot still go to Skeptics and Seekers .squarespace.com and listen to programs that are done in the past, and at least for a while, add your thoughts to the comments under the shows. Just sign in with Discuss and you'll be able to do that. But know that season 4 of Skeptics and Seekers, which would normally start in about a month or less, is not going to start. So we're going to call it a wrap, and rather than to recap everything that I've written in a blog post, I just encourage you to go to skepticsandseekers.squarespace.com, and you can go ahead and read the latest blog post, and you can comment there if you like. You can still get in touch with me at skepticsandseekers at gmail.com, and I read all the emails and I try to respond to everyone who is kind enough to write me. So in short, why is Skeptics and Seekers shutting down? Well, there are a lot of good reasons why it could shut down. I'm getting old and I'm tired. I'm tired of running a site. It's a lot of work, and I actually have things to do, and I have to somewhat minimize the non-paying things that I do and increase the paying things that I do. So that's a part of it, but it's such a small part, it's not even worth mentioning. It's just a way of me stalling so that I don't have to say the real truth, which is I think that in aggregate, when the tally is done by some impartial judge, that the aggregate of Skeptics and Seekers is negative rather than positive. And it's not something that I'm particularly proud of at this point. I think the conversations have become toxic, as they have been for some time. I think that's the nature of this particular beast, and it was arrogant on my part to think that I could do a better job at something that there's never actually done a better job at. And so it's always a red flag if you go to do something and there are a lot of smarter people than you who have tried their hand at it and failed spectacularly in exactly the same way. So I somewhat ignore those red flags. And in fact, I think that I know that I'm responsible for encouraging and fostering a idea of conversation as a blood sport. It is a particular kind of fun sport for me, in the same way that a hard-hitting tackle American football is a fun thing for me, but I don't think everyone should engage in it. In fact, I think most people shouldn't engage in it, and it's something that you should only do with a certain amount of training and background, and to try to turn that into something that's mainstream would be stupid and dangerous. And so there's that. So once again, you can read the blog post. I do want to go out saying just a couple of things, a couple of thank yous to people. So I want to thank Matthew for being one of the bright spots, one of the few people in my orbit over the last few years uh, who has had the best brought out in them. Matthew, he wasn't a writer when I encountered him, but he became that and added that to his repertoire. He wasn't a podcaster and a public speaker per se when I encountered him, but he became that, and a very good one. And I don't know that he was much of a debater when I met him, but he became that and became a very good one. He became a very thoughtful interlocutor and listener, and a quick thinker. And he's a good producer, an editor. He's very well rounded. He has grown in leaps and bounds, and I can't take all the credit. It may be wrong to take any of the credit, but I'm going to take some. I want to call Matthew a great success. I love this guy, and I've learned more from him than he ever had to learn from me. And so thank you, Matthew. I want to take a moment to thank David Kimball Cook, someone who, I've got a couple of more shows that I'm supposed to do, and those shows will never get done now. But David Kimball Cook, way back in the Unbelievable days, was someone who, even at that time, was able to cut through and speak truth to me in a way that I could not ignore. And he helped me to recognize some of my own personal flaws and some of the things that I needed to overcome if I was going to be successful at this at all. And so any success that I've had, I owe a lot of that to David Kimball Cook. He had a powerful influence on me early on, and I've said that before, and I still mean it today. So thank you, David Kimball Cook. I also want to give a special shout out to David Russell, who was with me this last season. David Russell is someone who I admired before bringing him on. I admired him while he was here, and while he hasn't always produced, the best arguments per se. You know what? The best arguments don't make you the best person. And David Russell is one of the finest people in my book, because among all of the other things that he is a kind human being, a gentle soul who was not ruined by his encounter here. We were elevated by his presence, and I want to thank David Russell for his time with us. And I wish I had more time experiencing him, because he inspired me to try to be a better person. And I'll take that inspiration further with me. I also want to mention Teddy. Teddy probably is the single most abused person on Skeptics and Seekers, because she gets it from both. Well, Teddy and Peter, they get it from both sides. The difference between Teddy and Peter, though, is that Teddy is a lightning rod. And so she, it's easy to argue with Teddy. She appreciates conversation as a blood sport. Her first post on Skeptics and Seekers was out of left field, nasty, mean-spirited, arrogant. It was everything I loved. And my first post to her was in kind. But I knew after those first few exchanges that this is a person that I'd like to get to know better. I immediately wanted to have her on the show. And as it turns out, and mostly I get this in private exchanges, because we've had a lot of private exchanges, Teddy is a fabulous, patient, and loving human being. This is something that you would not necessarily get listening to her on the show. and you wouldn't expect me to say it either. But she's one of my favorite people. She's very political. She's very religious, but more than that, she's extremely human. And in the grand scheme of things, has a very beautiful humanity, and I appreciate that about her. She can be that and still a badass. So thanks for that, Teddy. Thanks for being there and taking more abuse than you ever deserved. And thanks, Peter, who was smart enough to never come on the show, but he's there in the comment section every week. Peter never ends a conversation, no matter how badly it's going for him. he never takes his ball and goes home. He never slams the door and leaves the room in a huff. And he conducts himself with a great deal of decorum from someone who has friends on neither side. The Christians are coming at him, the atheists are coming at him, and yet it makes me smile to see his posts. And even though there's so many more people to thank, Brian with a Y, I love the thoughtfulness you brought to the comment sections. Those were always my favorite shows. Brian with an I. So who doesn't love Brian, right? Recently, I won't say who, he's been called an Athenian, but I could think of a lot worse things to be than an Athenian. Someone who enjoys considering interesting ideas. And the thing is, it's not like he's going to just change his whole life and jump on a new thing just because it's a new idea that he's exploring. But he has taught me how to explore everything, and he's made me care about things that I normally don't care about just by seeing the way he explores them. And he'll explore almost anything. And he explores it respectfully, he explores it honestly, he explores it with great research. And he's a guy who, instead of having no friends, he's a guy that everybody loves, which is, I don't know how that's possible on a board like this, in a community like that. And when I figure it out, I will have become a better person. And so Skeptics and Seekers has been, well, maybe a toxic environment for a lot of people in a lot of ways, and I recognize that. It's been an amazing experience for me. That's a little bit selfish. Sorry about all you fools who got ran over, but what a ride. That doesn't come out right, but I guess that's appropriate for a Skeptics and Seekers kind of send-off. So I just want to thank everybody for coming along with me, and I benefited from everybody at one point or another, in one way or another. And even the people that I don't get along with on the board, I benefited from them too. And I take at least the responsibility that is mine for bringing out the worst in the people who sometimes show the worst. I think that we all need to do a better job at trying to bring out the best in the people around us. And so I'm going to work on that. I'm going to figure that out, and I'm going to fade away, and I'll be there. I'll be lurking. I won't be commenting. I'll probably appear on other podcasts here and there because I'll still podcast, but I'm not going to do another project until I figure out what it is that really needs done, that I can contribute to and leave something in the world that's positive, and something that I can point to people at the end of the day and say, you should consume this because this was good work, and it'll leave you feeling better about things. And I don't have that project yet, so we'll see. you can leave your suggestions on the board, and I'll look at them. I'll see them. I won't be commenting on the board. If anyone wants to talk to me privately, once again, skeptics and seekers at gmail.com. And hopefully, I will not have to come in and moderate the end of this discussion, but I'm kind of here as a moderator safety net. And so, my greatest hope at this point is that this is actually the last thing I have to say. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the actual moderator and the participants. Thanks, everybody.
I honestly have no idea how it fell to me to moderate the last debate on skeptics and seekers, but we're going to get started. And I can't even promise that this debate is going to leave you, in David's words, feeling better at the end, because in fine skeptics and seekers fashion, we have a conversation today that is as full of controversy, I think, as it is possible for a conversation between skeptics and Christians to be. So, without any further preamble, today's conversation is on abortion, and I'll go ahead and introduce very briefly the two people that are going to take the bulk of this debate. We've got Darren Lute. You all know Darren. Hey, Darren, how you doing?
I'm doing good.
Thank you for taking the skeptic side of today's debate, and on the other side, one of those people who often gets a hard time, quite frankly, on the skeptics and seekers boards on the Christian side. But he has agreed to show up today and to defend the Christian view on abortion. And I don't think it was an easy decision to make. But in the finest tradition of Still Unbelievable and Skeptics and Seekers, we will do our best to honor the fact that he showed up. Mac, thank you for being here.
Hey, Andrew, thanks for having me.
So I'm not going to give any additional preamble to this debate. Both sides have agreed to come with they both have introductions. The introductions will take 10 or 15 minutes apiece. And in the run-up to the show, Darren agreed that he would go first. I don't have any thoughts on who will go last. We'll see how the show naturally ends. But there will be a Q&A section at the end, and we're going to keep this to 2 or 2.5 hours. So the last show of Skeptics and Seekers will do this one thing that is unusual. It won't be a 14-hour show. We're going to keep it to 2 or 2.5 hours.
Yeah, don't make promises you can't keep.
Well, true. we're going to try. Okay, so Darren, I know that you're ready, and thank you for agreeing to go first. And I'll hand the mic to you, and we'll see how it goes.
All right. Well, I guess first thing I'll say is that I have provided resources for what I'm saying here. There were a lot of considerations I took into consideration when providing the resources. The most primary one is that I'm kind of lazy and I procrastinate a lot. So there's that. There's also the fact that probably 99% of the people hearing this probably doesn't have the technical background to even understand a lot of the scientific papers that are a part of this discussion. So what I tried to do with the resources was provide mass audience appeal for the papers. And I tried to pick as many papers that were written by the people that doing the research themselves, or that had extensively referenced the actual experiments and research and people that are actually doing the work in the field. So as you're going through the resources, you can either just take the high level paper to get sort of an idea of what's going on, or there's lots of resources for you to really sink your teeth into it and go as far down the rabbit hole as you really want to. I would suggest everyone do that. It's a fairly fascinating topic and well worth all the time that you're going to waste looking into it. So what is, I don't think anyone really mentioned what this is about, so I'll just give a quick summary. So basically this, from what I understand, today's topic is going to be the woman's bodily autonomy versus fetus's right to life. Why should one have preference over the other? And I think Tack also wants to get into a little bit of the morality behind that, maybe a little bit about the foundations. But I'll let him go there if I'm correct in that assessment. So in these kind of conversations, there are generally two lines of defense from the theists. One is the right to life of fetus, and then the other is the image of God that everyone is supposed to have. So the first thing I will be doing is just laying out a bunch of facts. Facts really don't tell us what we should believe, but it at least should inform what we do believe. Because if facts don't matter, then why are we even having a discussion? So the first part of the facts that I will be presenting are the society and legal standings of the right to life versus bodily autonomy. It seems to me that when I was preparing for this, it seemed to me that every example I could find, the right to life was always the weakest of the rights that people had. I know that sounds weird to consider, but it seems like whenever the right to life is compared to another right that we have, the right to life always loses. For example, there's the death penalty. When people commit crimes, there's a chance that their rights to being free and their right to life can be taken away from them. Usually it's a murder case, but that's not always the case in all countries. In some countries, especially the ones that are overly religious, you can lose your right to life just from being gay or not following the correct religion. In this country, it's mostly just for murdering other people, which in a lot of cases makes sense. Another case is gun rights. In this country, there are a lot of people that view their right to own a gun and that view their right to not be put on a list for background checks as more important than people's rights to life for like mass shootings or anything else that guns are used for. So in that case, we have the right to life of other people being subsumed by the right to own guns. This is also reflected in stand your ground laws that some states have. When you don't even have to be on your own. Sometimes you don't even have to be on your own property. You can just be in the middle of the street. And if someone is making you feel uncomfortable or make you feel like your own bodily autonomy is in jeopardy, then you have the right to shoot them. They have given up their right to life because you have the right to your own bodily autonomy and protecting that bodily autonomy. This has also been fairly well displayed in mask mandates and vaccines. People believe that other people's right to life is not all that important. It's less important than their right to have the government force them to take a vaccine that will prevent those deaths, or to even wear a mask cloth covering over their face to help prevent those deaths. They view that their own bodily autonomy is more important than other people's right to life. For a plague that has killed about 300 or has killed about 636,000 people as of this recording. So when I started searching around for times when the right to life actually trumped a person's bodily autonomy, I actually wasn't able to find any. And I took a few hours to look. Maybe my Google food just wasn't up to the task, or maybe I missed something obvious, but I wasn't able to find anything. In our society, in our legal system, bodily autonomy always trumps the right to life. Now, one of the other things that is usually brought up into this is the image of God. And this is usually tied into the right of life. They usually say that the right of life is given to us because of the image, we are made in the image of God. So there are a few things that the theist has to overcome when they use this type of argument. First, they have to demonstrate that God is a real thing. And given that over the last 12,000 years or so of written history, no one has been able to demonstrate that gods or magic are a real thing, that seems to me to be a fairly large hurdle. Then, if God is a real thing, they also have the problem of demonstrating that what they're claiming about God is actually true. How did you determine that God created us in his image? What does that even mean? How do you verify that that statement is actually true? And if it is true, then why is it that there is so much killing in the Bible? In the Bible, we have people, God directly commands people to kill in all sorts of situations. The most absurd is when he directly commands people to kill other people for picking up sticks on his favorite day. So even if we do have this image of God that we have, God obviously doesn't hold it in that high a regard, because he's fine killing people for picking up sticks on his favorite day. There is also the problem with the actual creation that God made. It's been the accepted number of miscarriages, and these are the pregnancies that don't go to term naturally, is between 10 and 20%. And these are the ones that we know about. If the evolutionary geneticist William Rice is to be believed in his research, then the number is actually closer to 50 or 60%, because most pregnancies, most women don't realize that they're pregnant, and in his research, he was able to pull out a lot of eggs that weren't wanted, and were able to find the things that will cause miscarriage in those eggs. And he found that about 50 or 60% of the eggs have these various defects in them. So I know a lot of theists will say that's the result of the fall, but the fall and its rules were made by God. So the fact that miscarriages happen because of the fall, the only way that could have even come to pass is if God made it so that the fall would result in that kind of behavior. So again, we are back to God, God's creation, having this in there. So if he is that concerned about the image of God, his creation doesn't reflect that. And then the last thing that I'd like to point out in the theology is that when we're talking about right to life and abortions, an abortion in Christian theology doesn't actually remove the right to life, because the fetus in Christian mythology goes to heaven. So we're not actually taking away its right to life. We're just changing where it has that right to live. So all of that is for people that exist as people. Then the theist also has the third problem in that fetuses up to a certain point aren't people. And we know this because of the science and what it has to tell us. So personhood is usually, and I sort of took all the different definitions and philosophy papers that I was able to find and how they're defining personhood. And there's a lot of different definitions, but they all seem to have at least some of these, if not all of these, present. One, the thing they're talking about has to be conscious, have consciousness. It has to have the ability to reason. It has to be able to be self-motivated. It has to have the capacity to communicate, as well as understand what that communication means. And it has to be able to have a concept of self, self-awareness. And we know where all these parts exist in the brain. Consciousness is the cerebrum, specifically the claustrum and the brain stem, sort of the beginning and the end and tying everything together. We've got the frontal lobe for reasoning. We've got the limbic system and the amygdala for self-motivated activity. We've got Broca's and Wemmicks area for the capacity to communicate, as well as understanding what that language means. And then we have the cortex for self-awareness and other self-concepts. So we actually know where all the aspects of personhood, we know what parts of the brain they come from. So we can actually measure them, check when those parts of the brain are developed enough to actually be able to produce these flags of personhood. So the very beginning of our higher brain structures only start to appear between weeks 12 and 16. The coordinated brain activity required for consciousness does not even occur until 24 or 25 weeks of pregnancy. And at approximately 34 weeks of pregnancy, that's when the two hemispheres of the brain actually start talking to each other. And in context here, when we're talking about abortions, 92% of abortions are performed before 13 weeks of gestation. So when we're talking about abortion, what we're really talking about, since 92% of them occur before 13 weeks, is less than 13 weeks. 7% are performed under 20 weeks. So if we are talking about 98, 99% of the abortions are under 20 weeks, then that means that we know that the fetus does not match does not have any of the flags for personhood. We know that because none of those systems start actually activating in the brain, are not built up enough in the brain to actually start happening until the 24 or 25 week time frame. So that's the third hurdle that the anti-abortion people actually have to overcome. They've got the fact that our bodily autonomy, in every example that I can think of, trumps right to life, someone else's right to life. They've got the fact that even in their own mythology, we're not taking away the fetus's right to life, and God has no real respect for the right to life. And we have the fact that we're not even talking about a being that has personhood in the first place. So if actual people, people that are conscious and have self-motivated activity and the ability to have self-awareness, if these people don't even have a right to life over someone else's bodily autonomy, then how does a being without personhood, I mean, how do you justify a person without personhood having rights to someone else's bodily autonomy. And that's going to be the third main hurdle that the other person is going to have to take. And I think that is mostly going to be my opening statement. I don't know if I used the full 10 minutes or not, or went over. But I think that's a good start for me where I'm at.
It was a start. Let me thank you for setting the foundation for the show where I did not. Having the announcement up front that Skeptics and Seekers has come to a full stop, I think probably for me a little bit. So thanks for picking up on that and working it through for the listeners, as well as providing what I think is quite a well laid out opening. So Mac Attack, there's a lot there. Our right to life doesn't seem to be as much of a right as we often think. Bodily autonomy is involved in this conversation. The human brain seems to provide some pretty good basis for understanding not only what it means to be human, but what it takes to be human. I'm not trying to modify your opening, but to the points that I think were well laid out in Darren's opening. And with that, I look forward to hearing your opening. What do you think? Let's get started.
All right. Yeah. Thanks for the opening, Darren. Thank you, Andrew, for agreeing to host this. Yeah, a lot of said, and there's a lot to pick apart in that opening statement, because I believe there's a lot of assumptions that are thrown into the language itself and the structure. But all right, this is my opening statement. See to it that no one takes you captive through hollow and deceptive philosophy, which depends on human tradition and the basic principles of this world rather than on Christ. It's the Apostle Paul. So when we talk about an abortion, first of all, we need to define what it is. What like if someone was visiting, for instance, from another planet, and they're like, what is this human practice called abortion? And you were asked to give them a definition. The basic definition would be, and I'm going to read it from, I'm not going to try and be biased. I'm going to read it from the Planned Parenthood website itself, just so that I'm not guilty of inserting my own view into call. So an abortion is the termination of a pregnancy, and it's meant to end the life of the developing human in the womb of the mother. So why is this such a controversial issue in the first place? Why are people getting angry at each other? Why are people screaming at each other in the streets? Why there's so much controversy with laws? And the answer to that is because this is an emotional issue. It's an ethical issue. It's not just a biological debate like are you right or are you wrong? It has to do with what humans think about what's right and what's wrong. And if we're going to go into the nitty-gritty of like facts versus opinions, I generally agree that facts matter more than opinions. So if someone says, I don't think a fetus is a human, that is an opinion, because you've prefaced the statement with I think. A statement of fact is, this is what this is. So in terms of what a human life is, like when does a human life begin? A human life begins at the moment of conception. This is a fact. This is not up for debate. It is not, as far as I know, scientists do not debate among themselves when does human life begin. Human life begins at the moment of fertilization, because that's when the man's sperm and the woman's egg meet and a human life is formed. So based on this, how do we figure this all out? Like, all right, that's happened, and what's going on? Where's the controversy? As far as I've been able to glean while I was preparing for this, is people say, like as we've heard in the opening statement, my personal body autonomy trumps your right to life. But I'd just like to challenge the audience for a second to think about the last 18 months, whether that statement is true. If you think about the last 18 months, you'll find that that statement itself is not true, because what happened? March 2020, COVID-19 is it's all over the world. People are told, stay home, save lives. Facebook comes out with an ad campaign, said, like, you can put it on your profile picture. Stay home, save lives, please wear a mask. You don't have to travel. You don't have to go to the supermarket if you don't need to. Healthcare workers are heroes because they're out there putting lives at risk. Everyone, please pitch in. For 2 weeks, we're going to stay home so that we can preserve human life. At that stage, we didn't know that much about what the COVID-19 virus was about. All we knew was that it was a respiratory virus, and it made older people, like it affected older people significantly more than it did the rest of the population. So what I recall from the entire scenario was that people in Italy, older folks, were suffering the most. And so it was important that people stayed at home and limited their interactions with their loved ones who were older. And so that was the narrative, right? That was what happened. And so what did we do? All of us, in a sense, had our lives changed. If we wanted to go to school, if we wanted to go to work, we wanted to go to concerts, we wanted to travel, our bodily autonomy was kept back. We were not allowed to do with our bodies what we wanted to do, because there was a virus that could possibly kill lots of people. That's what happened. So as we grew more in knowledge and understood what was going on, restrictions started to be lifted. And now, as heard, now it's okay, take the vaccine. That's how you save someone's life. And that's a whole different topic entirely. But the point is, the whole world, people in general, know that when it comes to weighing up the right to life versus someone's your right to liberty, your right to liberty versus someone's right to life always wins. You do not sacrifice someone else's life so that you can have convenience. And that's what some people did, actually. April, there were people who were marching in the streets saying, I need a haircut. The barbershop is not opening. I should be able to do what I want. That was after like a month of all this happening. And so people who did that, they were called covidiots. Like, these were people who were thinking of themselves. They were like, this is inconveniencing me. We need to open things up. And universally, almost like, it was very remarkable to see. People were like, these people are wrong. There was no debate. It wasn't like, oh, these people are acting rightly, because at the time they were doing something that was wrong. They were doing something that was endangering someone else's lives. And universally, people agreed that was wrong. When it comes to abortion, we have right to life versus right to liberty. Two people come together, they have sexual intercourse, and an individual human life is produced. That is a fact. That is not an opinion. And so, do we apply the same principles that we apply when we're dealing with each other to that situation? And I feel like someone who says that we do and supports abortion is being inconsistent, because even in something as experiential as COVID-19, we had to restrict our liberties so that we could potentially save people's lives. We did not, everyone did not just do what they wanted, which I feel is what the pro-choice side, pro-abortion side, says is the case. It isn't the case. Like, anyone who thinks about the 18 months, and I'm pretty sure this is universal, this has affected everyone on the planet, knows that there are things that they wanted to do that they didn't do because it was not safe to do so according to the science. Another aspect of this is that, okay, what does it mean? So what does it mean to be a human being? That's a philosophical question. It's an ethical question. It's a religious question. But as scientifically, because this is a scientific conversation mostly, a human being's life starts the moment that fertilization happens. And when that happens, you have a unique person with their own specific set of DNA. And from what I learned from geneticists is that it is possible to isolate cells and examine cells in a zygote or in an embryo to see what kind of hair color a person will have, what kind of eye color they'll have, whether this person can even have autism in the future. So when I read scientific papers, so for instance, I'm going to read one, and I'm sure it's going to be in the show notes. There's a link to it, and it talks about human brain development. It says human brain development starts soon after conception and continues into early adulthood. So what does that mean? It means like the second the sperm meets the egg and fertilization happens, human brain development starts. It's not like that unique human being there stays dormant, and then at some point, maybe like I think we've heard the 16th week or something, and the brain it starts developing. That's not true. By the 9th week, the brain is already it's appearing as small. So from the moment that someone is conceived to the moment that they give birth to the day that they die, their brain is always developing. So an argument being made that we are able to, we should be able to end the life of someone because their brain isn't developed enough is just illogical. It's not human. It's not, it goes against all natural forms of how we even conduct ourselves in society. We do not kill children because they're not, their brains aren't fully developed till they're 25. We don't kill teenagers or infants. We don't do this in our society. I know in the past that's what they did. But if we're going to talk about ethics and morals, these are specific issues that need to be addressed. And thankfully now, we have the technology to examine what happens inside a fetus's brain. In the womb, we see what happens. In the ancient world, smart people like Aristotle used to say, well, after conception, yeah, they used to believe that a human like life does begin at conception, but you should be able to have an abortion because they thought that a soul, like when the human actually becomes a person, is after 40 days. So Aristotle said that men gain their souls after 40 days, women after 90 days. Aristotle is a smart guy. I mean, if you're talking about him 3,000 years after his death, he definitely had smart things to say, but that's not true. Because he didn't know what he was simply a man of his time. He did not know what happened in the womb exactly. He knew that there was a life in there, but he was giving his opinion. And while his opinion might have seemed great because of the type of man he was wrong. And so now that we have the facts, now that we know what happens inside a womb from the moment of conception to the point that the child is brought forth into the world, now that we know that, our decisions have to be more informed. We cannot rely on fiction. We cannot say that the person in there does not have a developing brain or that they do not have conscious thought or spectral reasoning, because children, let me be correct, fetuses in the womb react to sound, they react to music, they react to the environment outside of themselves. Pregnant women sing to their children to lull them to sleep. If a child in there is feeling angsty and they start kicking the woman's womb, the woman doesn't say, "I'm kicking myself." No, the child is kicking them because it's not their body anymore. It's an individual in there. It's not like a cavity or like a cell that's just kind of just popped up out of nowhere. So in conclusion, right to life always trumps right to liberty. We've all experienced this in the last 18 months. We know this inherently because if we didn't, we would not be having this conversation to begin with. In closing, when a man has sex with a woman, how many, like, this is just perhaps you don't know this, or you do know this, but you might not like have thought about the implications of it. But like when a man has sex with a woman and ejaculates through the woman's womb, how many sperm do you think are released at one go? The answer to that is not 100. You might think it's 1,000. You might even think it's 1,000,000. But depending on the fertility and the age of man, between 30 to 60 to 100 million sperm get released at a given go anytime a man ejaculates into a woman while having sexual intercourse. This means that when people are having sex, there is a strong desire by nature itself, biologically, to produce life. You might think that's overkill. Why do you need that many sperm when there's not that many ovum in the woman's womb? Well, that's nature. That's what sex is meant to be about. And so that's the primary purpose of sex. I believe that a woman who is perhaps contemplating having an abortion has to perhaps think about the implications of what their action has on society and also on themselves. Because what we talk about when we talk about what is right and what is wrong is we don't think primarily about ourselves. We think about the sort of obligations that we have to other people. A woman has an obligation to her offspring. A man has an obligation to take care of her wife and their child. And so this is how society thrives. This is how society works. And it is important that as a society, we strive to be consistent in our thinking. Thank you.
Okay. Making sure I was not still on mute. So, Darren, there's a lot there, and we're going to move now from opening statements to a more conversational form between the two of you. But Mac, there were some interesting points brought up there. One was the comparison of abortion to a matter of convenience. Darren, I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. There's the idea that Aristotle got it wrong, and that we actually have hard data for life and maybe a soul. I think we need to get into that a lot more. And what about our actions? Does a society that includes the possibility of abortion naturally mean that we're not carefully considering our own actions, and that our societies somehow won't thrive as a result of inclusion of abortion as a legal matter? Darren, you've probably got some other thoughts, but those were points that I hope get addressed as we start the back and forth. So I'll hand it back to you, and you guys feel free to chat without me driving the conversation.
Okay, so I missed a little bit of the what Mac was saying because my internet's crap. But I did catch that life starts at fertilization. Mac, you had said that that's not a controversial thing in the sciences. That's actually not entirely accurate. It is kind of controversial in the sciences. There are, if you're talking to like a geneticist, he'll say that as soon as the 6-day fertilization process happens, then you've got an individual human there. But keep in mind that I wasn't talking about human, I was talking about person. So if you have a specific line of argumentation that only works for humans and not people, then that's not really going to address what I was saying, because I wasn't really referencing human. I was referencing persons. And the reason I reference persons rather than humans is because if we have aliens that come down and aren't human, I don't think anyone's going to say that they're not persons and don't have rights just because they're not human. So that's why I focus on persons rather than human. Another reason is because once a person's brain becomes brain dead at the end of their life, we no longer consider that a person with a human with rights. All their stuff is taken away from them and given to other people. They're put in the ground and generally ignored. What respect we do give to them is mostly for the people that are surviving and not for the body. So if that's going to be our indication for when a human is no longer a person, going that way, then it makes sense to use the same indication going the other direction.
Well, can I ask you a question straight up? Do you know what happens when a woman is forced to deliver a stillborn child?
How do you mean?
Like, for instance, let's say a woman is pregnant and she goes to the doctor and they do the ultrasound and the doctor says, I'm sorry, your child died a few days ago. Are you aware of what happens afterwards?
You mean, I'm assuming they remove the stillborn from the woman?
Yes, and then what happens after that?
I don't know.
All
Depends
right.
on the person that the family, I would imagine.
Well, here's what happens in a hospital when a woman has to deliver a stillborn child. You're saying they're not a person, but medically, when a woman has to deliver a stillborn child, it's a very traumatic experience. It's actually pretty awful. Like, when I was reading about it, I was actually taken aback by how ignorant I was about this whole situation, because I usually just used to think it was clear cut, but it isn't. It's a very emotional issue. So I'm reading from a website called Tommys.org, and it goes about what happens when a woman has to deliver a stillborn child. So what happens is depending on the woman's preferences, they will have her either come back and tell her, okay, we're going to deliver your baby for you. You can either get a C-section, or you could deliver the baby naturally. And this is traumatic for the women because, you are expecting to bring a human life into existence, but now you have to bring in a dead baby. And the medical procedure is that you're told, let's deliver the baby comes out. The nurses take a picture of the baby, they clean him up, him or her, and they dress him up, and they go to the woman and they say, do you want to see pictures of your baby? And what they generally found was that if the woman, it helps for the woman to be able to even hold their dead child in their hands, because that makes it's sort of cathartic for them. It makes them appreciate the moment. So if you would allow me, I'm going to read just one.
Okay, but before I allow you, what's the relevance of this?
The relevance to this is because you're saying when a fetus is in the womb, they're not a person. But when I look into the medical procedure, because I was wondering, okay.
Actually, I didn't say that when they were in the womb, they're not a person.
But you said they're human, right?
I said that, I didn't mention human at all because I'm focused on personhood, not human. And we know what the brain structure looks like of someone that fits the definition of personhood as we've defined it. And the fetus before a certain age, before 20 weeks, doesn't match that definition. But a fetus after 20 starts matching that definition in various ways. So I'm not talking about if they're in the womb, they're not a person. I never said that.
So when do they become a person? I feel like I'm not understanding because it sounds like to me you're saying, okay, yeah, they're a human, but they're not a person because they don't have enough brain development. And I don't want to misrepresent you, but that's what I'm hearing.
We have the definition of personhood that has been handed down to us from different philosophers over the centuries. And so by that definition, we know enough about how the brain works to know whether the fetus matches that definition or not. So we know the brain structures, how they work, and if they're working properly and connected, whether they're actually producing those flags that have been defined as personhood.
But you're aware that there are people who are born with brain defects and like they're born prematurely. Are those people still people?
Yes, because they still match that definition.
Definition of brain development.
Yes.
Reaching us. So you're saying, so what I'm trying to ascertain is, where do you draw the line? You're saying 20 weeks is when someone officially becomes a person.
I'm saying that the science, the reality that we have discovered to be true about how the human body works, tells us that 20 weeks is the absolute minimum. That actually not 20 weeks, but 24 weeks is the absolute minimum that the fetus will match the definition of personhood as given down to us through the ages of philosophers. Yes.
You're saying philosophy is what trumps the science of what happens in development between.
No, I'm not saying that.
What are you saying? Because
I'm saying that the philosophers have given us the definition of personhood, and the science has been able to tell whether the fetus has met that definition or not.
Which philosophers?
I looked at probably a half dozen, as well as the Stanford Dictionary of Philosophy, and sort of compiled all the different definitions so that I had all, some of them don't include all of them that I mentioned. Some of them only have one or two. Some of them contain all of the things that I mentioned. But I tried to get as expansive as I could so that I could incorporate all the definitions that I was aware of.
So you believe, like Aristotle, that men and women are different. They get different, like they get different personhoods, different times, like a man.
I'm pretty sure I didn't say that.
Well, because like I'm asking because you're saying we get this from philosophers, but you're not naming anyone. I can't cross-reference. I don't know who you're talking about. I like we're talking about science here, right? And so when we talk about science, we also included the medical field, like what happens in reality versus like what happens in the philosophical ether. So what I'm trying to describe here is what happens when a woman has to deliver a child before term. And what happens is they take the baby out, they clean him up.
Okay, and how is that relevant?
It's relevant because the baby, right, is being treated as a person even before the fact
well,
that
the body is being treated as a person. That doesn't mean that it actually is a person, right?
That doesn't make sense.
Let me point out for the listeners that we are all over the map on the development of a fetus, from the moment of conception to the potential moment of birth 9 months later. And what is done with a fetus at one stage of development in a clinical setting may not be what is done with a fetus at another stage of development if it is aborted. And so as you guys are kicking this back and forth, I think it's useful to sort of pin down the time frame that you're talking about, so that we're not comparing the abortion of a fetus at 4 weeks to an abortion at after 26 weeks or even 24 weeks, which is currently, I think, the age of survivability. And I take that as being quite important. I don't want to interrupt your conversation, but I would like for you to be a little more careful about the time frames that you're talking about, so that the conversation stays a little more precise.
All right. What I was saying is this: that even if you shouldn't be able to abort your child any point between 0 weeks to the moment that they're born. And so what I'm trying to find out is, what does Darren think? Does Darren think that after 20 weeks it becomes morally wrong to kill the child? That's what I'm trying to find out.
I think that a person's bodily, we cannot force one person to give up their organs and health to another person, even if it helps them survive.
Well,
so even if you want to claim that the fetus is a person, then I believe that we cannot force one person to give up their body for another. And I don't believe that anything the fetus below 24 weeks is even a person, because they do not have the brain structure to even be counted as person.
So when did it become wrong to kill you as an individual? At what stage of your development?
I'm not entirely sure how that's relevant to what I said.
Because you're saying they're not a person until they have proper brain development. Is that right?
Yeah, at what point did I say that the fetus never has a right to life?
No, I'm asking you a question so that I can find out what you're saying. I'm not
Okay, so
trying
go ahead and
to-
repeat the question then, please.
All right. When does it become morally wrong to kill someone in the womb? At what state? What is there a weak day? That's all I'm asking.
If the woman hasn't given consent to the fetus to use her body, then it never becomes immoral to remove the fetus from the woman's body.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, you're saying a woman can decide to get an abortion up to 9 months, and that is not immoral.
Well, after I think it's 24 weeks when the fetus is viable, if the woman doesn't want to share her body more, they do a delivery rather than an abortion.
Doesn't want to share her body?
Yeah.
I understand what that means. So you're saying it's up to the woman to decide when they want this human to get out. So it's up to the woman, pretty much, right?
It's her body, so yes.
Well, again, that's not scientifically accurate. It is not her body, because when the child is kicking in there, it's not, the woman doesn't say, I'm kicking myself. You're aware of that, right?
So the woman's body is not her body?
No, I'm saying the child when the child in there needs to. So why do women, when they're pregnant, go to the bathroom a lot? It's not because they're the ones needing to go to the bathroom, it's the child. And so that influences what happens, but it's a different body in there. You acknowledge that, right?
I thought it was fairly clear. Yeah, the fetus is, if you're going to count it as a person, then the fetus is using the woman's body. Correct. And the woman can give that fetus permission to use her body or not use that body as she chooses, because it's her body.
So a person has the right to kill another person based on if they decide they don't want to have that person in their womb anymore.
Yes.
All right.
Because it's the woman's body. She gets to decide who makes use of her body. She has control over her own body. Another person does not have rights over her body.
Is there a similar example of that happening in real life?
How do you mean?
Like, we're talking abortion, right? You're saying that's ethical. Like, someone decide, I don't want someone using my body for their purposes. Is there a similar instance in reality that matches that?
Well, you can't take someone off the streets and force them to give up their organs for another person, even if it's to keep them alive.
Okay. But how is that, analogous to an abortion? Because it seems like you're comparing apples to oranges. You're taking a situation where two people have sex and a child is conceived, and you're saying at any point that the woman decides.
The people having sex is irrelevant to the question.
No, well, I haven't asked my question. I'm just wondering. You're saying a woman can decide to kill the baby, the fetus inside the womb, at any point from between 0 weeks and 9 months, right?
If the fetus is using the woman's body and the woman does not consent to having her body used, then yes.
Then yes. Okay. So then the stuff about brain development is irrelevant then, because.
Well, it's relevant in that this assumes that the fetus is actually a person. But the fetus isn't a person, as the science indicates. So if we're going to give the fetus more rights to the woman's body than the woman herself has, then we have to fully understand what's being said there. Because you're saying that a fetus that is not a person, they may be human, but they're not a person, has more rights to the woman's body than the woman herself does.
But that's just not true, because again, you're kind of being inconsistent. You're saying, okay, they're a person when they have their bare minimum brain development at 20 weeks, but then you're saying, okay, a fetus is not a person because
I
if the
don't
woman
think I
gets
said
five,
that, but
well, if we
Mac,
roll the tape back, we'll find that you did say that. Anyone listening can see that
Mac,
because,
hold on.
yeah,
So maybe what would help here is for you to make an affirmative counter case. If the woman doesn't have the right to her own body at some point, I'd like to know where that point is. Does she have the right to say no during sexual intercourse? Is after sexual intercourse, if she does have the right to say no all the way through sexual intercourse, but then after intercourse, there's this moment where she doesn't know she's pregnant. Can she go take the morning after pill? And if not, why not? At what point do you say that a woman loses her right to her own body if you think Darren is wrong? I think that will help clear up this point and maybe help the two of you move the conversation forward.
no one has absolute bodily autonomy of their body. First of all, that's
Okay,
an
that's
presumption.
not what I asked though.
Yeah, but I'm answering the
Okay.
question. All right.
Okay, go ahead.
Right. I'm answering the question. All right. So absolute autonomy. I do not have the right to do what I want anytime I want. If I don't want to, if I want to walk around nude in my neighborhood, I can't do that. I'm going to be arrested. I'm going to be put in jail, even though I'm not physically hurting anyone. I do not have absolute autonomy of my body. Likewise, any person, any woman does not have absolute autonomy of her body, even if she's pregnant, because ultimately that's not her. Like after fertilization happens and there's another body in there, that woman has a duty. It's not either abortion
Hold on.
or death.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me just ask the question again. I don't want to be in the middle of the debate, but the specific question that I asked that I'm hoping you'll answer so that the two of you can move on is, when does she lose that right? So at some point after sexual intercourse, a woman may not know that she's pregnant, but may think that she is. Does she at any point have the right to go and do something like take a morning after pill? Or is the woman confined after sex at every period after sexual intercourse? Is she bound by the idea that she might be pregnant and that she has lost the right to do anything with her body that might counter pregnancy? That's my question.
Well, the answer to that is yes, because pregnant women, after they're pregnant, they lose lots of rights. Like,
and why do they lose these rights?
Well, I'm answering the question, Darren. You cannot smoke or drink alcohol or even coffee when you're pregnant. Why? Well, because it affects the child in the womb. That's just a fact. It's plastered all over 7-Elevens and Walmarts everywhere. Pregnant women, please refrain from drinking alcohol while you're pregnant. Why is that the case? Because they have lost, like, it's not that they've lost it, but they're suspending it for the sake of another human being. They're not losing it inherently. They do not lose the right. So it still becomes an issue of like, all right, you have rights to life versus right to liberty. And no one has absolute autonomy of their body. This is just a fact. It's true even with the COVID example, when you were talking about wearing a mask or getting a vaccine. If someone were to make this same argument that you're making back to you, you would disagree with them. So my answer to Andrew's question is, no one has absolute autonomy, and she doesn't lose it. She suspends her autonomy for the sake of another human life. And that generally is how we determine what's moral and what's not moral.
And why does she not have rights over her own body? Why does the fetus get those rights?
Okay, well, you'd have to answer, why is it wrong for a woman not to drink alcohol? Like if you were walking around and you saw a woman who's visibly pregnant and she had a bottle of whiskey in her hand, what would you say to her?
Well, it doesn't matter what I would say. She doesn't actually lose the right to do it. She's just encouraged not to.
So it's fine, right, for her to do that?
I didn't say that.
Well,
I said that she didn't lose the right to do it, but that she's encouraged not to.
All right, that doesn't answer the question, because I'm asking, is
Well, we're
that
talking about rights here. So if you're not
Yeah, we're talking
referencing
about-
rights, then you're not actually addressing the actual issue.
in a legal context, right? She can't be punished for drinking alcohol, right? While she's
Uh,
pregnant.
Right, because of the bodily autonomy rights that she has.
Right. But what happens when a woman drinks alcohol while she's pregnant?
Then it depends, actually.
It depends on
Yeah,
what.
a lot of things.
Okay,
Sometimes
so
it'll affect the fetus, sometimes it won't.
it won't.
Sometimes, yeah.
That's generally not true, because that's not true at all, actually. And again, I bet the audience can look this up for themselves. Women are not supposed to drink alcohol because it affects the child severely, and it
Well,
gives
they're not.
rise to
They're
birth
encouraged not to because it has a chance of affecting the
What chance?
fetus.
Are you aware of the percentages?
I haven't looked it up. No.
Right. Well, I would encourage you to look it up so that you might abandon that idea that it might, because it does significantly. And so, because a woman after she's pregnant, she cannot do what she wants. She cannot go run a marathon. She cannot compete in the Olympics if she wants to. She cannot. In some cases, she can't even drive. So that comes with the pregnancy. And I'm saying, the woman not being able to do these things doesn't mean that she's losing the right to do these things. It's that she's suspending the right to do the things because there's another human life in her that is developing. Is that clear?
Right, but you haven't said why the fetus gets more rights to her body than she does.
I never said more rights. They have the same rights inherently. I'm saying,
Well, I can't take you off the street and take your organs from you to save my life. So if I don't have the rights and the fetus does have the right to take the woman's organs and use them to keep itself alive, then obviously it has more rights than I do, right?
that's a false equivalence, because you're saying that the fetus is like a kidnapper. They're not. It's not the same situation, because
So
in
the
one
fetus isn't using the woman's organs?
they are, but like you're
Okay,
equating
so then how is it a false equivalency?
what's the main purpose of a womb? What's its primary purpose?
Well, the main purpose of a heart is to beat blood through the system. But if I take yours away from you and use it for myself to keep myself alive, then does that mean that it's okay because the primary purpose of the heart is to beat blood?
I'm asking what the purpose of a womb is, not what the purpose of a heart is. Because
Mac, when you say purpose, just to make sure that we're not going to
well, I'm not asking
get tangled up in not using a word the same way. When you say purpose of the womb, what do you mean by purpose? Are you talking about an overriding design kind of purpose, or are you using purpose?
I'm using it like, what's function? Okay. What does it do
right.
in a woman's body? Do men have wombs? No, they don't. But like, I'm asking, what's the purpose of a womb in a woman? What does it do? What's it there for?
Okay, so sorry, Darren, go ahead.
I was just going to say the uterus is there to feed a fetus, but the fetus is using that woman's organ, to keep itself alive. So you keep saying it's a false equivalency, but I'm still yet to see how it's a false equivalency.
Because you're asserting that someone has rights, right? Someone has a right. A stranger off the street has the same right as a fetus has a right to the womb. But that's a false.
Okay, so what rights to the womb does the fetus have? Why does it have that to that womb?
Right. There are lots of homeless children in my city. I have a responsibility to feed the children in my household. If I do not feed the children in my household, they will die. And the government will come and knock on my door and say, you're going to jail. But if I do not feed the children in my city, and there's millions of them, I will not go to jail, because these are children who are not under my care. Conversely, a woman who has a child growing in her womb has a responsibility to that child, and a biological responsibility.
We're not talking responsibilities here. We're talking rights.
We're talking about rights, and they're tied to responsibilities, because I can't come and kill you if I feel like it. If I feel like you will have
right, and why can't you come and kill me? Because I have bodily autonomy, right?
No, That's not the reason.
That's not the underlying reason.
Why did we go kill Nazis in the Second World War? Is it because they had bodily autonomy?
No, it's because other things overrode their right to life.
There we go. There, you answered the question then.
Yes, I did.
Yeah, you answered your own question there because these
No, I
people,
didn't. I said that
you're asserting it's
that
wrong.
other things overrode their right to life, just like I'm saying that other things overrides the fetus's right to life.
Other things being what? Convenience?
If that's this consent of the woman, whatever the reason for that may be.
So I can come and kill you if I feel that it's going to be convenient for me.
No, because then you would be because your rights and your right to swing your fist ends at my nose.
Right. And during an abortion, why is the fetus's right to life not important?
Because the fetus is using the woman's body against her consent.
So I can kill the children in my house because they're kind of using my resources, right?
Your resources are a part of your body.
No, well, what's the difference? Because it doesn't matter either
So
way.
you don't know the difference between a jug of milk in your body?
No, I'm saying why are you creating a distinction where there isn't? You're saying that it's okay for one human to decide, I want to kill this human that's using up my stuff. And
I'm saying that one human can decide, give consent for another human to use their body.
Wait, I'm sorry, say that again?
I'm saying that a human has the right to deny consent of another person using their body.
And where does this right? Like, I feel like you're still not getting what I'm saying because I'm asking you, why is that the case? Like, why are you saying that you
Why
have
wouldn't it be the case?
Well,
What gives the fetus more rights to the woman's body than she has?
Again, we are going back in circles because I already said the fetus doesn't have more rights. I'm
Well,
saying
what you're describing is more rights.
have equal rights, and I'm saying that
you're not describing equal rights.
Yes, I am. I already explained it because I said again what I said, Andrew. Just a second. What I said is that the woman suspends her rights for the sake of the fetus.
So if she's suspending her rights, that means the fetus has more rights to her body than she does.
That's not what.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
So that
Mac, I'm getting you off here.
All right.
We've spent some time on this. I think both positions are very clear. I'm going to try to help us carve a path out of this particular thicket, and I'm going to ask about something that you said a minute ago, Mac. It had to do with purpose. I thought it was an interesting point. You said, "What is the purpose of a womb?" And it seems to me that there are a couple of possibilities here that a womb has sort of an extrinsic purpose, a purpose extrinsic to the individual, and that ground would have to be defended. That there's some extrinsic purpose to wombs, or that every person that has a womb decides what that purpose is, and that purpose might be to have children. It might also be not to have children. And so to get us out of this particular back and forth, maybe I can ask both of you to talk about purpose. Okay, it looks like I'm going to have to edit silence over that question.
All right, no, I didn't know. Is it my turn to speak?
Sure.
I thought the question was directed at Max, so that's why I was.
Well, either one of you, I'm happy to let either of you answer, but we have a purpose question here. What's the purpose of a womb, and do we capitalize the P in purpose or not? So who gets to purpose the womb?
Well, it has a basic biological function, and that is to rear a child. Like gestation period is 9 months, so the child is allowed to develop in there, and then after 9 months, if everything goes smoothly, they exit the womb and they continue their development as a human being, as a different part of our species, as our part of our kin. So the womb has a primary purpose, that is to provide a safe environment for the child, and that's why there's amniotic fluid that comes about that stops, like if a woman gets unfortunately punched in the stomach, and it's like the amniotic fluid absorbs that so that the child is kept safe, and all these phenomena that is going in there to keep the child safe. And someone is so someone comes along and says, well, doesn't really have a purpose. It's just, like, I can decide what purpose it has, and that's not even biologically right. You can't biologically decide what happens to your body. It's stuff like, if I eat bad food, well, biologically my body is going to decide what happens, and it's not like I can be like, I don't consent to this, because my body has biological functions. If I go out without a mask or without a vaccine and I interact with people and I get sick, I can't say, well, I didn't consent to getting sick, because that's biologically, you do not have the power to control what happens in nature. Like, if you partake in a biological act and consequences come about, and someone is saying that, well, I did not consent to biological processes in my body, that's just not logical. And I feel that's where most of the argument comes from.
So, Darren, what about the difference between function and purpose? What are your thoughts?
Purpose is one of those wiggly words that I generally try to avoid because it means so many different things. I'm happy with the Mac's definition of a function for it. I just don't think that his comparison of function and consent are relevant to the discussion because consent is about actions and what you're going to be doing and what other people are doing to you. And I mean, sure, you can not consent to being sick all you like, and you can still get sick, but that doesn't mean you're still not, that it doesn't mean you're suddenly consenting to being sick. It just means that you can't really do anything about that.
But you're saying in the case of abortion, you can do something about it, so you should.
If you remove your consent to use your body for someone else to be using your body, then yeah, you should.
So you give consent, and then your body gives biological consent, and then
your body doesn't get. There's no such thing as biological consent. But your biology is just chemistry. There's nothing about consent in there.
So consent is like an immaterial concept that humans have.
Well, consent is one person giving another person permission to do what they're doing to them.
So is it a material concept, is what I'm asking. Like, can I test consent? Maybe like level of, like, is that something I can do?
I would suppose so. You just ask someone if they've given consent or not.
So it's either or, right? It's either 100% consent or 0%. It's never like 50%. Like, yeah, I'm kind of sure. Yeah, I kind of give consent. Is that still consent?
It's not usually when people are talking about consent. It's usually 100% or nothing. And if they're unsure about it, then it's better to presume that they're not giving consent, because if they're unsure about it, then they're not actively saying yes. They're sort of waffling about it.
So you have to be 100% sure when you're giving consent, right? For it to count, because you can't be like 50-50 about, or 60-40 about what you're agreeing to, right?
I would say that would be the best way to go, just so there are no regrets later on. Yeah.
All right.
So, Mac, you're driving toward a point there that it's possible for us to have a range of emotions about a decision. I think that's true. So, how does this, in your mind, inform us about the right to an abortion?
Inform us in what way specifically?
That's sort of my question. We've asked about whether consent has to be 100%, or whether there's some value less than 100% that is acceptable when making a decision. But presumably, you don't support the notion that if a woman felt 100% certain that she wanted an abortion, that would be that would be grounds for the abortion. So I'm trying to understand from your view, what consent, are you just talking about the act of sex?
You're
What are
asking
you
if,
driving at with consent?
well, I'm trying to point to the fact that biologically, even in things that we do, if we make choices, certain choices, there are going to be certain consequences. So the people who unfortunately died last year, when they chose to, like, I saw like an article on Unbelievable or something like this pastor was like, COVID is fake, blah blah blah, and then he ended up passing away. And then I'm looking at the comments, and people are saying, well, he deserved it because he kind of made that choice for himself, and so him dying is kind of the consequence of his choice. And so coming back to abortion, like, and I know this is a super sensitive topic, and it honestly should be talked about more with more care, and I'm gonna try to do that more in the future. When it comes to abortion, it's like it's the same thing biologically when people have sex, even if you're saying, "Oh, I'm not trying to get pregnant," that's not, I mean, that's not even realistic because we set targets all the time for things we're going to do in a day. Like Darren was talking about how he procrastinates, and like he probably at some point in the past said, okay, I'm going to get my sources, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to do things systematically, and this is how they're going to go. But then it didn't happen. And so that's also what happens when people say, okay, I'm going to have sex and I'm going to have birth control and I'm going to make sure I'm taking the pills that I need to take. And then they get pregnant and then they're like, I didn't consent to this. Well, if you do certain actions that have biological implications and you're aware of the biological implications, I don't think lots of people know uh, just how much risk they're taking when having sex, even if they're on birth control. You are actually, if you allow ejaculation to take place inside you, like you are allowing millions, hundreds of millions of sperm to go inside you and fertilize an egg. That's what happens. I don't think any amount of birth control, you may be able to stem it, but ultimately that's what comes with the action itself. And this isn't to say that I'm going to try and call people reckless, but that's just what happens. That's just a fact of life. It's not an
Okay,
opinion.
hold on. We're there's a lot said there that needs to be pulled apart. So, Darren, talk a little bit about sexual intercourse and ejaculation, and as Mac put it, because at least as far as I'm aware, it's not the case that every act of sex, even in two reproductively healthy adults, can always result in pregnancy. So I think we've got to be a little careful about talking about risk. So from your view, talk about risk in regard to pregnancy.
I would agree with Mac. There is a risk when you have of pregnancy when you have sex. It has nothing to do with consent or someone else using your body or anything else like that. But sure, there is a risk, and people should try to mitigate it as much as possible. In fact, one of the most effective things that the pro-life folks could do is to make sure that everyone has medically accurate sex education. That has been shown empirically to be one of the biggest ways to stop teen pregnancy and abortions. If they were really serious about wanting to stop abortions, then medically accurate sex education should be at the top of the list because that is what's going to help mitigate a lot of these consequences.
All right. You said stop abortions. Why should abortions be stopped? Why does it? Just
I
ask.
don't think abortions necessarily should be stopped. I'm just saying that if your goal is to stop abortions, then you shouldn't be worried about it after the sex has happened. You should be tackling the problem before the sex even happens to make sure that people are as safe as possible, that they're using condoms, that they're doing everything in their power to actually mitigate the risks involved.
All right. Well, I agree with you in the sense that I do feel like sexual ethics is a better, like, understanding what sex actually is helps people make better decisions about what before they have sex. But my question is, you just said you don't want abortions to stop. But that's kind of an outlier opinion, actually. When I was researching this, like, most people actually do say, I would rather live in a world where less abortions have. Are you saying that you're perfectly fine with abortions happening in the world?
I don't believe I said that. No.
I'm asking you. I'm not saying you did. I'm just asking.
No, I would be perfectly happy if no abortions had to be done at all. But that still doesn't make the moral weight of bodily autonomy of the woman any less.
Well, I'm kind of getting a disconnect there, because so why would you rather there be less abortions? What's wrong with it? Is why? Because what's your reasoning behind that?
I don't necessarily have a reasoning for it. It's an issue that has caused so much societal harm, just in the way that women have been shamed and vilified for making choices about their own bodies, that it would just be nice if it wasn't required anymore. People would actually follow the science rather than these emotional pleas that aren't even accurate to how reality works.
Well, people are following the science, and the science says life begins at conception, right? And that the fetus.
Well, the science actually doesn't say that, but that's okay.
Yeah. I mean, I'm challenging you, right? I'm challenging you now to name a scientist who says life doesn't begin at conception.
A lot of them. About the only people that you'll find that say life starts at conception, which conception is not an individual thing. It's like a 6-day process. So it's there's a set of scientists that, like geneticists, that'll say, okay, we have the DNA, it's individual because you got part of the mother and the father, and it's distinct from the mother. So that's what we're going to call life. And they're usually at the 14 day mark after conception, because that's when things like twins are no longer bound to happen. But they're just talking about human biology. They're not talking about personhood. Then you have other people that are, I want to say, are like 14 days after, and I forget. Let's see, you got 14 days, you got like 14 days because of the twinning issues. You've got 6 days because of that's about how long the fertilization takes. And you've got some people that are at like the 12 and 14 dates because, or 12 and 14 weeks because of the EEC. And then you've got like the neuroscientists that are at the more like 24 week because of the personhood issues. So, I mean, the science really is all over the place. You can find scientists that will say that fertilization is the beginning of life, but they're normally just talking about individual DNA. They're not talking about personhood at that point.
Well,
so let me ask the two of you. Oh, Mac, go ahead and answer, and then I've got a question.
I'll just refer to the audience to look it up, because I've been looking it up like seriously and listening to all kinds of books and trying to find a single scientist, a single neurologist who believes that life doesn't begin at conception, because it's unanimous, and the audience again can always just do it for themselves.
Yeah, they can.
Yeah, they can.
I found all sorts of references to it. So
agree. So when you just heard what happened, I challenged Darren, to name scientist, just a name, like we can go look it up, so that who says that life doesn't begin at conception. And we didn't hear any names. We just heard geneticists, neurologists, blah, blah, blah. And we didn't really hear any names. And that is the important thing about science.
Well, to be fair, we haven't heard any names coming from you either. So
I did mention that this study was done about the brain in the child's, like how brain development happens is by Lindsay Kunkel. And again, there's going to be references at the end of the show. But if you're saying that they're scientists,
I've got 6 pages of references that I gave Andrew, so people can find it there.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
So we're we're dangerously close to ending up in a place where we become an internet chat room rather than a recent debate. And up to this point, this has been a really good show, and I want to thank you both. So I want to ask one more time, and then I'm going to give both of you the opportunity to close, and we're going to let the people lurking in the chat room ask some questions. But I just want to bring this back to a point that I think people get confused over. And maybe we can get a clear answer. I hope that we can. Is all life personhood? Because to say that life begins at conception, well, we hear that pretty commonly. And I'm not making an argument one way or the other, but it seems to me that this debate pivots on the difference between life and personhood, if there is a difference between life and personhood. And the further question about life is, does all life begin at the moment of the first cell division? Well, actually, at the moment that two haploids join, right? An ovum and a sperm, right? So does all life begin there? And if so, does all personhood begin there? Mac, are you saying yes? Not only does all life, but all life and all personhood begin at the moment of conception?
I have to. I know it's gonna sound like I'm dodging the question, but there has to be a definition for personhood. That what's the scientific definition for personhood?
I'm asking you. That's what you were supposed to bring.
Well,
Your definition of personhood.
All right. So life begins at conception, fertilization. You have a unique human being there with their own set of DNA, and this at the moment of conception, the human brain is already developing, right? So even if you think that that child is not really thinking about like philosophy or anything that we would call conscious thoughts, that child is still, it's a human life. Like if you were to ask a couple of biologists, okay, look at this zygote from a chimpanzee, look at this zygote from a human, they'll be able to tell the difference. If they can't, then they're not good at their jobs. So their personhood is inherent. It begins the second that they are fertilized, and that's reality. That's it.
Darren,
Well,
life versus personhood.
the obviously they're not the same. For one, the brain doesn't start growing at conception. It actually doesn't start. The neural tubes don't start closing till around week 6 or 7, at which point the brain separates into the three parts. So you've got some neurons that are there, but the brain itself doesn't actually start developing until about 6 weeks. And there's no scientific definition for personhood, just because the science doesn't work that way. It doesn't think that way. It has a different way of approaching the world. But if you take the definition of personhood that we've gotten throughout the ages and you sort of conglomerate them into a big pile of what all of them say, which is what I did, where you've got consciousness and reasoning and self-motivate, all that, we actually can look at science and see, okay, when do those parts of the fetus actually start developing? And we can actually look at what parts of the brain start developing when they're developing, how they're talking to each other. And when does consciousness, we don't know exactly when it starts, but we do know what's required for it to exist. And so if those parts don't exist, then consciousness can't exist.
So are you saying consciousness, you don't know when consciousness begins?
Not entirely, but we know for a fact that it can't occur until at least 24, 25 weeks of pregnancy, because all the parts aren't in place for it to exist.
And is that relevant in any way in determining whether abortion is fine or not, or is it completely irrelevant?
I think it's relevant in the fact that if we're going to give that we shouldn't be giving more rights to the woman's body, who is a person, to something that's not a person. I think that's relevant. The person, at the very least, the person should have more rights than a non-person should.
Okay, so you have a person, you're saying, so this is where it's like, it's kind of confusing, because you're saying, okay, you're talking about brain development, and I'm just wondering, okay, how is this in any way relevant if we've already reached the conclusion that a person can determine what another person's rights are? Like, you're just pretty much saying one person's right to life trumps another person's right to life. Is that right?
No, I'm saying a person's right to their own body trumps a non-person's right to her body.
Well, how have you determined that they're a non-person?
Because the science says so.
Well,
I just explained this.
No, what you explained was, okay, I've read all these philosophers down the ages, and these philosophers have opinions about when a person becomes a person, right? Because again, I'm just listening.
No, I didn't say that. I said the philosophers give us the definition: consciousness, reasoning, self-motivated, the capacity to communicate, presence of self-awareness. That's the definition that all philosophers that I've been able to find seem to think are required. Those are the items that all the philosophers seem to think are required for a person to be considered a person. And the science goes in and tells us when the fetus actually has those attributes.
The philosophers come before the science. Is that right?
Only because the philosophers are the only ones with an actual definition. Scientists don't have a definition because they don't think of the world that way.
How do scientists think of the world? Are they not also humans?
So you don't think that just because people are humans, they can't think of the world in a different way? I'm confused as to this question.
What I asked is that you have humans in the way, scientists and philosophers, and you're saying, all right, philosophers, nameless, faceless philosophers, have determined that being a person means having these set of attributes, whatever you call conscious thoughts, spatial reasoning. And
yeah, I tried to include all the aspects of all the philosophers I was all able to find.
So where were these philosophers from, if you don't mind me asking? What part of the world?
I think there were some Greek philosophers, some modern philosophers. I did the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy that did a good
Mm-hmm.
job of sort of conglomerating all the ideas into one place.
So it's difficult for me to find other philosophers who say that life begins in the womb and say those philosophers are right because they agree with my viewpoint. Is that valid?
Well, please stop conflating life and personhood.
Well, I'm pretty much asking you the same question that I'm using your same methodology, because if I am to believe what you're saying, I have to be consistent. If I'm to cross over to what you're saying is the case, it's like, okay, philosophers have told us the definition of person, and so we take their definition.
If you can take a philosopher's definition and then find the science that backs that up, then I don't see a problem with that.
So Aristotle said that a boy's soul begins at 40 days.
Okay, and where is the science that demonstrates that the soul starts at 40 days?
Well, there isn't any, right?
Okay, so, and then you're not comparing apples to apples.
Yeah, but you're doing the same thing. You're saying
no, I'm not. I'm saying philosophers gave us the definition of what constitutes a person.
So
I'm not saying that they said that it happened in 40 days or it happened in 20 days or whatever. I'm saying they gave us the definition that what people mean when they say person or personhood.
Are philosophers fallible or infallible?
Okay. Guys, we actually went through this at the front of the show.
Okay.
So we are at a point where we have a little bit of a disagreement over what personhood is. Darren, you were pretty clear about what you thought it took to be a person. Understanding of your own existence, self-motivation, capacity to reason, et cetera, et cetera. Mac, do you disagree with any of those attributes of personhood that Darren laid down?
I disagree strongly, because there are people in this world, on this planet, who do not have what I would say is like they're not able to be coherent when talking, and by that I mean like they're somewhat brain damaged, and I know several of these people, or people who have autism because their brains didn't develop well while they were in their mother's womb, or people.
Yeah, and my
Unfortunately,
definition doesn't exclude any of those.
well, answering the question, Darren, you have these individuals, right? And what we're hearing is, all right, what makes someone a person is if they meet the bare minimum of these arbitrary philosopher definitions of personhood, and then we take those definitions and then we align them with science. But when we look at reality, we have people out there who are not perhaps even experiencing reality the same way that most people do. And it's not like we think that these people are less. So it comes down to like a worldview issue, because are you saying that people who don't have like who are not as mentally or brain developed?
And I told you repeatedly that I'm not saying that, because every person that you mentioned is included in the definitions I gave.
How are they included if you're saying that you need to meet a certain minimum level?
Because they meet the minimum level.
And the minimum level, is this determined by philosophers or by science?
Well, the philosophers are the ones that are producing the definition, so I would imagine it would be determined by philosophers.
I can find my own philosopher who says, those people over there who look like that or think like this and can't do that. Those people, not really people. Not because the plural of persons is people. Person is people. And it's like someone says those people aren't people. I should be able to take their argument as valid, because that's pretty much the stuff that happens in history, right? People look at other people and they say, they're not.
Okay, so am I doing that?
Yes, you
I'm
are.
not saying, no, I'm not. I told you repeatedly, I'm not fucking doing that. Why do you keep insisting I'm doing something I told you repeatedly I'm not doing?
Well, we're talking about humans in the womb, right?
So if an alien comes down, they're not human. Does that mean they're not a person?
We're not talking about aliens. We're talking about humans. Right?
I'm talking about people, personhood, and that includes aliens that come down and are people. Well, so are you saying that the aliens aren't people because they're not human?
That's not what that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, all right, again, you don't have to start talking about aliens when this is a very straightforward topic, because you're talking about humans, right? And you're talking about humans in the womb, and I'm asking you, are they people? And you're saying they're not people unless they develop up to 20 weeks. That's right. Is that correct so far?
24, but sure.
24 does, I don't know, because I don't know. It sounds like you're saying it's fixed, but it's not the case. But so you're saying someone.
Well, we know through the science that the coordinated brain activity for consciousness does not occur until 24 to 25 weeks of pregnancy.
All right, so they become a person after 24 weeks.
Correct, because consciousness is part of the definition of being a person.
Okay,
I don't know what definition you're going to come up with that doesn't include consciousness.
But I'm trying to figure out then if you're drawing the line, you're drawing the line at 24 weeks or 25 weeks.
Okay, guys.
I'm not going to get an answer to that.
What we've been here, and I think the case is pretty well laid out. So I'm going to ask both of you to get ready to deliver your close. Darren, if you'd like to answer that, you're certainly welcome to. Mac, I think what I've heard through this debate is that the line is not an exact day, week 24, day 1, or week 24, day 3, but there is a developmental stage at which it is possible to develop consciousness, and that doesn't happen at 12 weeks. It can happen at 24 or 25, and so it seemed that there was an acceptance that there is some give and take in the developmental cycle. And so it's probably not helpful to try to pin development down to 24 weeks in 1 day or whatever. So you're welcome to respond to that, and then we need to get to our closing statements so the folks in the gallery can answer questions. I'll say to you folks that are not on mic at the moment, when you come off of mic, You do not have to announce who you are. Some people are comfortable with that and some are not. So feel free not to announce exactly who you are if you prefer not to. So, Mac, does that clear up the developmental issue that it is not an exact moment in time, but a moment in development, and that moment in development can occur in some range after after some point in time, but it's not an exact point in time? Does that help at all?
Yeah, it's helpful because again, kind of defeats the purpose, the argument of abortion being moral. Because let's say you're one of those people who says, okay, not really a person, but when they become a person, it becomes wrong. But we don't exactly know we don't know if it's 20 weeks and 5 days, or we don't know if it's 24 weeks and 3 days, and it's different for everyone. So it's like you're putting yourself in a dilemma instead of just saying, okay, since let me err on the side of caution. Let me not kill a person. Let me not be in support of killing a person. You're pretty much just saying, because of what some people, some philosophers give a definition of personhood, and because the science says it's between these weeks and it's different for everyone, and you're kind of making a decision that involves the life of another human, and you're making that decision based on pretty much conjecture. And I don't think that even we don't do that in terms of any law that I know of, where it's like you're kind of throwing a dart in the dark and hoping it lands. Like, oh, maybe it might or might not be a person, but you know what? Let's just see what happens. And I would appeal to anyone who perhaps is in that camp who thinks, like perhaps after this 24 weeks, whatever, that's when they become a person. I would appeal to them. Please just reconsider the fact that you're not infallible. You don't know when a human being, if that's what you believe, if you're like one of those people that personhood is something that you gain as opposed to something that you inherently have when you're fertilized, when you're a zygote. If you're one of those people who believes that, perhaps you might want to reconsider the fact that you are acting in a sense where you're kind of rolling the dice on the life of someone else, where it's like not a person, and then it's like they become a person after a few days, and you're not really sure because there's no way for you to confirm that. As we've heard, like I asked, do you know if a person has consciousness? Like, I'm not sure. Okay, if you're not sure, then why would you go ahead and kill them? Yeah.
Darren, you have one more bite of the apple on this point, and we're going to move to closing statements. So, do either of you have a preference for which one of you goes first and close? This isn't a formal Oxford-style debate, so we can figure that out. Who went first in the opening? Darren? So you?
Yeah, I did.
Okay, Mac, is it okay with you if Darren closes?
Okay.
Okay, Darren, do you want to talk about that confusion about consciousness one more time?
Yeah, I would just say that Mac's characterization of what's actually going on is completely inaccurate. We're not confused. The science is fairly clear. The parts of the brain that produce the ability to solve new and relatively complex problems, self-motivation, consciousness, they just physically do not exist in a working order prior to about 24 to 26 weeks. So it's not that we're confused. It's not that we're throwing darts, in the dark. We know for a fact that's the absolute minimum it can be. So, and since most abortions, 99% of them are under 13 weeks or under 20 weeks, knowing that consciousness doesn't happen until 24 weeks means that we know for a fact that a fetus, when we're talking about abortion, is not a person. It's not a thing that has consciousness. It's not a thing that can resolve new and complex problems. It's not self-motivated. It doesn't have the capacity to communicate or process complex language. It has no self-awareness. It can't, because the brain just isn't developed to the point where it can do that. And I think that giving a being, that a fetus, more rights to the woman's body than she has when it isn't even a person. I just don't understand how you can make that moral leap, which we didn't actually hear from McIntyre. He didn't provide any moral grounding or foundation or anything to suggest that we shouldn't use the science to make those determinations.
Okay, thank you. Mac, if you are ready with your close, I will ask that we keep the closes for both of you a good bit more brief than the openings, because we're rolling on to where we need to let the folks in the chat participate. And so, closing thoughts, Mac.
All right. If you've listened to like 2 hours, I'm surprised the time has gone by that fast. But you've listened to two sides here, and it's ultimately a question of like, okay, facts, but it's also a question of worldviews, and it's ultimately a woman who has 6 children and is contemplating having an abortion, you know, like a philosophical argument about why she shouldn't perhaps might not be the one that convinces her. Like ultimately, from my worldview, uh, a worldview where ultimate purpose exists, where God exists, where there is forgiveness and there is uh, redemption. A worldview like that, a woman who is contemplating an abortion obviously needs love and support and care, and she needs to understand why she needs to turn to Christ for repentance of her sins. And so when it comes to the issue of like determining is abortion moral, is the human in the womb a person, where like most of us when we were talking, like if you go back and listen to this entire debate, you'll notice something. You realize that uh, Darren is always going between. He always has to check himself when he's talking about a person and a human. Like interchangeable. He uses them interchangeably, or sometimes you can tell that he's trying to make a distinction that is not natural, and that's because it isn't. We do not do that in reality. We do not distinguish between. You don't say, oh, that person is really not a person, except for when atrocity is happening. And this isn't a personal slight against Darren. I'm not going to say that he believes people are less than, but he does, in the sense that he is taking a position that is not consistent with reality. It's not consistent to say, okay, a human developing in the womb is not a person until they meet this set of criterion that I've personally determined for myself from philosophers, and then I'm taking those definitions and I'm applying science, which we've not heard a single scientist named. We've not, like, I'm sure there's going to be sources at the end of the show, but like it's like we've not heard that in this discussion. We've not had any scientist who believes this. And the fact is, again, we're talking about facts here. Human brain development starts soon after conception. It's not something that happens after a few weeks. And when someone says, okay, I'm going to categorize humans based on this sort of thoughts that they have on, or what contributions they can make, like, this is a challenge to anyone who's listening. How has that worked out for us in the past? How has that worked out when we, as a species, have decided, okay, see those people there with dark skin, can't really do science. They can't really, their civilization is not all that advanced. I know they look like a human, but they're just not a person. This is not an emotional argument, because this is something that happened in the history of the United States. And at the forefront of ending slavery in the United States were Christians who were appealing to objective, absolute definitions. Even they did not even have ultrasounds, and they were showing that all human beings have intrinsic value. You may disagree, but if you disagree, you're kind of casting your vote. You're casting your law on that side. You might not be as extreme on the spectrum as some people, but you are literally across the line. You're over that side. And the appeal is to cross over to the side that is consistent with ethics and morality, with what's right, because ultimately everyone has to say that they want to be treated like a person. We don't say, oh, I want to be treated like a human. That's completely antithetical. So people want to be treated with dignity and respect. People have a right to life, but you cannot be treated with respect if you don't have a life, right? And so, like, when we think about, actually, I'm just gonna piggyback off what David Johnson said at the beginning with his opening statement about skeptics and seekers. He said, "The best arguments don't make you the best person," and I agree with him. You can make you can say the science says that thing in the womb is not a person. You can say that. That's an argument. But ultimately, if you are caring about what's happening on the ground, like if I ask you what's wrong with abortion, and you say, well, the only thing that's wrong with it is that people are being shamed, then you are not in the side of reality. You do not know what happens inside the abortion centers, where you have living, breathing human beings being sucked out with a right vacuum and being killed. That's happening. And so the appeal is to join the right side of this debate, of this ethical mountain of our time, and be on the right side of history, and the choice that ultimately matters. Because ultimately, this is a worldview issue, is that you cannot make that choice. Like, my intention of coming on this show today wasn't to primarily make people pro-life, because ultimately I know there's a bigger problem, and that's the problem that people are desperately in need of Christ in their lives. And so when you turn your back on the author of life, by definition, you will be forced to defend death. You're walking towards a position where you're making all sorts of arguments and justifications for why death is this, why it's acceptable, or why my rights trump the right to life of another person. And all these are just smokescreen. People know that they're not true. That's why when my opponent was asked to list the names of people who say this, he was just not able to do it. And I'm glad, because you can't do it, because they don't exist. People inherently want to be treated like people. And so I just challenge the audience to keep an open mind to this. If you are on the pro-choice side, think about what's been said about the value of human life. Think about what's been said about when someone becomes a person. It's not clear cut. There's no clear day. We can't say, okay, you were a person yesterday at 12 o'clock, but now you're a person, because officially that doesn't even exist in the science. That's not accurate. That's not true. So just there, and yeah, thank you so much for tuning in, and yeah, God bless.
Mike, thank you. I know that in the run-up to the show, there was some misgiving about what might happen here. I will just say that I hope you feel like you were fairly treated, because I know that can be a concern. So I hope that you walk away from this feeling like you got an equal share of time and got to state your positions in whatever way you felt was most beneficial to you. And you are welcome back if you would ever like to come back.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, it was a fair show. Can't complain.
Darren, it's down to you. And then the way we will run the comments is, David, I'll ask you first. So I'm going to ask questions in the order that you guys appear on the Zoom screen here. So we'll ask David, and then we'll ask the person with the black and white photograph, and Brian with an eye, because that's the way you guys line up. Darren, you're close.
I would just say, if anyone wants specific names and research, you can go to the 6 pages of resources that I provided to Andrew that he's going to be putting in show notes. Or you can just Google, scientific consensus of when life begins. You'll find the controversy right there. It's not as clear cut as Mac Attack wants you to believe it is. But I also wanted you to notice that Mac Attack didn't actually have any argument as to why anything I was saying was wrong here. I gave basically an emotional appeal, and emotional appeals are fine. Nothing inherently wrong with that, but they don't actually help you when you're trying to prove, well, anything really. I presented a definition, one that people I think would generally agree with if you're in the audience. I'm not sure how you think that something that isn't conscious and has no self-awareness is a person, but if you want to believe that something that has no consciousness and is not self-aware is a person, then has no brain function, has no where the physical properties of the brain that produce any of that is absent. You're more than welcome to believe that, but then that's going to make death certificates a lot harder, because the definition of death is when the brain stops working. So when the brain's not working, there isn't anywhere in our society or the science that says that something with no brain is a person. I guess I will just leave it there. I feel that the definition for personhood that I gave was the standard one. Well, standard-ish. I know there's a lot of definitions, but it included all the different variants. I tried to make sure that I caught everything. We know what parts of the brain produce those aspects. We can tell when they're working and when they're not working. We know that personhood is not limited to humans, because if aliens come in, then we're not going to say they're not people just because they're not human. So human DNA has absolutely nothing to do with personhood. And I believe that a woman has rights to her own body that should not be subverted by anyone. There's no putting them on pause. There's no taking them away. I think that she has the ultimate right to her own body, and that just like someone can't take you off the street and steal your organs, and a fetus can't demand the woman use her organs to let him survive. I think that is the ultimate disagreement we have between us. He thinks that a fetus should have more rights to the woman's body than she does, and I don't believe so.
Darren, we've done a number of shows together. As always, I appreciate your thoughts. Like I said to Mac, I hope you feel like this was a fair show, a balanced conversation.
Oh yeah, you always do a good job.
Thank you.
Thank
I
you,
appreciate that. Thank you, Mac. Like I said, you're welcome back. I think you do well, and regardless of what happens with SNS down the road, and there'll be more on that at some point in the not too distant future. I would enjoy continuing the conversation with you. So thank you for being willing to show up, not only on SNS, but Still Unbelievable. And Darren, as you know, we'll be doing more shows together in the future. So, David, this has been a lively, lively chat. I know that it's not going to be published along with the show. There are some outstanding questions, and you are in the top left corner of my Zoom screen, so you get the first bite of the apple. I think that's pretty. I think that's pretty fitting anyway.
I don't know who this David is, but I would like to remain anonymous. As
Okay,
part of the
Mr. Deep Throat, you have.
I also don't want my fetishistic practices outed either. Where was I?
Questions.
We're all wondering the same thing.
So, it's not my show anymore. I can torpedo it any way I like. So, it's so freeing. I just have one quick question for both people. Same question. So, as a person who actually has changed their mind on this issue, I'm going to pull the Justin Brierly and ask each of you what would actually change your mind on the issue, or is this just an unfalsifiable, set in stone kind of thing for both of you?
I think for me, you'd have to convince me that a woman doesn't have rights to her own body. I'm not entirely sure how someone would go about doing that, but that would be the path forward for me.
Well, for me, I already had my mind changed. I used to be very pro-choice, and I suppose what changed my mind to being pro-life was that I realized that it's not a black and white issue. It's not it's not like going to a dentist and getting your teeth removed. It's not. We don't have philosophy. We don't ask ourselves, that tooth, it had an impact. It's just clump of cells. We don't really have those kinds of talks about basic biological other things that we do, like getting surgery in our arms and stuff. But we do have discussions about that here in this context. So for me, you'd have to, in a sense, reconvince me that an abortion is what's like it's the best solution at any given time. And we're talking here about like someone says, I want to get an abortion because this is the absolute best decision I can make right now. You'd have to convince me that's the case.
Thank you for that. Because she has appeared on podcasts in the past, I will simply say, Teddy, it's your turn.
Hello. Hi.
Hey, by the way,
Hello.
I'm glad to be able to share a mic with you here just for a few minutes. And like I said to Mac, you're welcome over on SU anytime. And I'd love to share a mic with you in the future and to keep the conversation going, whatever happens here.
Thank you. I feel the same way. I don't know what was the question. I was checking some email that I had to check.
No. So you get to ask the question of both Mac and Darren. So you've heard a pretty long debate. There are a lot of questions out there having to do with personhood, with bodily autonomy, with questions about science. What are our rights? Is there a difference between function and purpose? I mean, we talked about a lot of things over the last little while. And as you were listening, did you have a question for one or both of these guys that you thought didn't get answered, or that you'd like to hear addressed in a different way?
Well, do you mind if I kind of pose a challenge to one of the things that Darren said?
By all means.
Okay.
Hey, I won't object, though Darren may.
Is this going to be a
out of the
speech?
line of fire?
Is this going to be a speech or a question? I'm just curious.
I don't know.
Hey,
Sounds
all
like
I
a
know is
speech.
the gun's not aimed at me this time. So
It had to do with Darren's claim that we value bodily autonomy in this country more than life. And I strongly disagree with that, because I don't think he's really looking at the issue deeply enough. In this situation where self-defense, the right to self-defense exists, you can't just kill someone. You can't use lethal force on someone unless you are being threatened with lethal force. So if somebody is just punches someone in the face, you can't shoot them. That's the person that does the shooting will be having some serious repercussions with our criminal laws, at least in the United States. And so our laws deal with the preservation of life. So it is only in order to preserve your life, or the right to self-defense and the right to defend others who are threatened with death or with deadly force, then you can use deadly force against them. But it's not to preserve bodily autonomy. So, for example,
Was there a question in there somewhere?
Well, it's a comment, but my point is that, for example, when the police have a suspect and they're arresting that suspect and the person is resisting, the police can't just shoot the person. It's only when there's deadly force or when they're threatened with deadly force that they can then escalate it to shooting. So I just kind of wanted to challenge that, because that was an important thing that you were arguing, but I just think it was factually incorrect in terms of it. It was just looking at the surface of the argument and not looking at, well, what do those laws in terms of the law of self-defense and defense of others, what are they really going to preserve? They're not preserving bodily autonomy, but life. And so life is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That is what our declaration, which is really our founding document in this country, that's what it's all about. And then the US Constitution, adds to that. But that's what, that's the most important thing, life. And when with the death penalty, as you mentioned, that's only to send a message to other people. Hey, if you go around murdering people, you might get the death penalty. So it's partly
then that means that the message is more important than that person's right to life.
No, the message is so that fewer murders will take place, so that more lives are preserved. So it always
right. So that what you're saying is more important than that person's right to life.
We're talking about innocent life, and there is a distinction, because even God, in if you want to get into the religious aspects, God permits the death penalty for murderers. So
sure, because he commands people to kill people for picking up sticks on his favorite day.
Well, God's rules. God, he's God, so he can create his own rules. And
when you can demonstrate that's true, then I'd be happy.
I'm just saying, if you want to bring up God into the equation, my point is just that you're bringing up God.
But all you're doing there is just saying that God doesn't really respect life, and he doesn't have to, but yet we have to. So if God doesn't respect it, then there's no reason that we need to.
Of course respects it. That's why he gives the penalty to murderers.
Okay, this sounds like fertile ground.
Can I respond? Or
Well, of course you can. Let me just finish that thought. This is fertile ground for a debate between the two of you, and you are welcome to bring your figurative weapons to Still Unbelievable and have this out. I think this is actually a terribly interesting idea that the things that God permits and doesn't permit, and ethical code, that sort of thing. And so rather than prosecute a debate in the question and answer section, I would love to have you two have that conversation. I'll send out an email in the not distant future. And if you both want to, we will have that conversation. Teddy, I don't want you to feel like I'm cutting you off.
No, not at all. I got my point in.
Okay, Mac, go ahead.
No, I think Teddy makes a great point. Right to life always trumps right to liberty, because again, in the case, like there were huge some high profile cases that happened last year, like the George Floyd murder. Everyone who saw that it's unjust. A police officer cannot do that to another person. But then there was another incident that happened this year in January where someone's life wasn't really in danger. It happened during the DC riots when someone was, a lady named Ashley Babbitt was climbing through a window, and she was trying to get to where the vice president was and the senators were. And the police officer took out his gun and shot her, and she died. And people, I think the consensus is that the police officer did nothing wrong because, again, they were acting like their mentality was that they were protecting the lives of other people. So this one person's bodily autonomy to be in a place in a restricted area, their autonomy doesn't.
Well,
Yeah,
that's not bodily autonomy, though.
Let me
Actually, her
just point, hold on
hands
for just a
were
second.
visible to that
Teddy,
police
hold on
officer.
for just a second, please. I'll point out for the listeners, we're not going to have a debate
all right,
over. No, Mac, I'm not dismissing what you said.
all right.
Did
Yeah,
you
my point
finish
was-
your answer? Because if you didn't, I want you to be able to finish it.
okay, like 30 seconds. So my point
Okay.
there is that that person was like, I have a right to be protesting and getting into the senator's room, but well, that didn't happen because they were shot, and people were saying that the police officer did something right, and that's again a case of controversies. That did he act justly because the woman wasn't armed and all that? So what I'm saying is that there's a situation where someone's bodily autonomy did not, like, it did not trump someone other people's right to life, even if they thought that they were not going to do anything wrong. Yeah, done.
So for the listeners, I happen to know something about this case. Teddy, you may have been about to say this, but in the case of George Floyd, Derek Chauvin was found guilty of several crimes. Actually, he was guilty on all counts. In the case of the Capitol Police Force police officer that shot Ashley Babbitt, not only have there been no federal charges or local charges, it has been announced that there will not be. So in the case of Ashley Babbitt, that particular act was looked at, folded, spindled, mutilated, and that officer is on the job today because the governing authorities did not find his actions to be contradictory to his responsibilities. Brian with an I.
There's so much there, Andrew.
Yeah, well, and we can have that conversation, but this is not a
We should.
conversation about Ashley Babbitt.
Okay.
So
But it has to do with life. And did she present a threat to that?
Teddy just went away. Can everybody hear
No,
me?
she didn't. Someone slipped and hit her mute button. Anyway, you were about to move on.
I was about to move on, not because I don't want to hear what Teddy has to say. I love Teddy, and I'd be happy to have this conversation. But this isn't a conversation about DC police officers and politics.
I've always wanted to do it, and I'm not sorry.
You did it before. Don't do it when
It
I'm
didn't
winning.
stick the last time either.
So
See, I unmuted myself.
Teddy, sorry, we didn't actually hear that, and I am going to move on. You are welcome to come to Still Unbelievable, and I would be happy to have that conversation with you. I don't want you to feel cut off, and I know that you think this is germane. I think the right to life is germane to this conversation. I'm happy to have that conversation if you want to. Brian with an I. Somehow I said I wasn't going to announce anyone, and I have in fact announced everyone. Brian with an I.
Nice job. Thank you. The only thing I'd have to say is that there are lots of reasons why women decide to have abortions. And one way it would seem to me, to reduce the number of abortions is to look seriously at the reasons why women are choosing to do that. And if you can eliminate those reasons, then the desire, the need to have the abortion go away. And so it would seem to me that that would be a practical way of coming about this. And that's about the only comment I've got. Thank you.
I
Can you
am-
throw something on that?
I'm 100% in agreement with Brian with an I.
Mac, what do you think?
I'm sorry, I wasn't really paying attention. What was you say, Brian? I'm sorry.
He was
What
just-
Mainly that there's women have a lot of reasons for having abortions. And if we can eliminate those reasons, whether it's financial or work-related or something like that, then that would help reduce the number of abortions.
Yeah, I agree with you, but I don't think understanding the reasons for why people have abortions is going to change anything, because people have been having abortions for a long time. And the primary reason that people have abortions is because of financial reasons, poverty. They feel like it's going to impact their finances. And I personally don't think that we should be killing humans because we cannot afford to feed them. And I was thinking of this individual, actually. I was actually researching about Cristiano Ronaldo, and his mother contemplated aborting him because she already had 4 kids at the time. Well, Cristiano Ronaldo is one of the wealthiest people on the planet, and he's one of the most well-known athletes on the planet. He just made a huge transfer back to his old club, and we can't say like, okay, that person might have difficulties in life later, so let's kill them. I don't think that's even can be logically argued from unless you're actually omnipotent or all-knowing.
Okay, Brian, thank you. I think that's maybe I think maybe that is the place to shut this down. Is a place where we have come to some kind of agreement that what we want is to have a world where people have to do less on either side. We don't want people disadvantaged. We want all life to have its best possible chance to succeed. And I will also say that on both sides of this aisle, whether you are a Christian thinking that you're giving all life the best chance to succeed by prohibiting abortion, or whether you're on the other side of the aisle and you think that the best way for life to succeed is by having fewer unwanted children, by creating more thriving among us who are here. What we all want is a better tomorrow. And if we can't look virtually on our Zoom screens as it happens right now, if we can't look at each other eye to eye and realize that what we want is the best tomorrow that we can all create, we can just stop talking. And I'll point out that the reason that Skeptics and Seekers is shutting down is because, for the most part, we couldn't see the good in each other when we were staring each other keyboard to keyboard. And we lose something today. We lose something right now. When the record button is no longer on, when stop is pressed, Skeptics and Seekers goes away, and it goes away for the worst possible reason. It goes away because we couldn't bring out the best in each other. So if you're listening and you're thinking, oh, well, we got rid of those damned skeptics, we're not taking a victory lap. And you shouldn't be either.